Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about gay men's strengths, making the most of your culture. I've been a psychotherapist specializing in gay men for over 28 years, and I do this as a licensed clinical social worker in California, as well as providing life and career and relationship coaching to guys outside of California, in other states and even other countries around the world. And I'm also a trained sex therapist. But in my original training as a Master of Social Work student at the University of Southern California and the Suzanne Dvorak Peck School of Social Work, where I also teach, I'm an adjunct associate professor, I was taught and continue to teach students about the person in environment theory, which takes into account not only a person's mental health and well-being within themselves and their own personality, but also the social culture in which they live. But it's an interactive dance between that person and the setting they find themselves in a certain time in history and a certain place in the world. So that's why it's called person in environment. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines culture in part as the customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits of a racial, religious, or social group. The characteristic features of everyday existence, such as diversions or way of life, shared by a people in a place or time. And according to the Culture Wheel, which I took from a website called bridgestogether.org, celebrating our culture, a new how-to guide, the elements of culture can include these 9 traits. Number 1 is knowledge and stories. Number 2 is language. Number 3 is traditions and rituals. Number 4 is techniques and skills. Number 5 is tools and objects. Number 6 is the arts. Number 7 is food and drink. Number 8 is values. And number 9 is the greater community. So think about that. Think about who you are, and think about what culture you come from. Are you an American, or are you from another country? Are you Protestant, or Jewish, or Catholic, or Muslim, or agnostic, or atheist, or Wiccan, or Baha'i, or what kind of spirituality background were you raised with? Or maybe you're from a certain country, but a certain part of that country. Like maybe you're a native New Yorker, right? Doing the accent wrong. Or maybe you're a Texan, Texas has kind of a proud culture of, cowboy hats and boots and barbecue. Just think of the things that we think about. Think about dialect. Think about values. In my culture, we do this, but we don't do this. Or food and drink. A lot of times that's the comfort foods that we were raised with by usually our mothers. In the arts, when you think of your culture, what are some arts that come to mind? Italian culture, we think of maybe statuary or opera. Techniques and skills. Think of cultures that are known for rug making or pottery, or in circuses sometimes, like Cirque du Soleil, we've had Chinese or other South Asian acrobats. Language. What language do you speak, or languages? What was your native language growing up as a baby? What knowledge do you have about the history of your own culture? What kind of stories come out of your culture? What were you taught as a kid about the great stories of your culture? And these are all part of the cultural wheel, and we each kind of sit in the center of the cultural wheel. Now, much has been written and discussed, especially in the years after the Stonewall Uprising in New York in 1969, about LGBT plus culture. And lately there's been a resurgence of civil rights discussion as part of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and elsewhere, and a cultural uprising renewing calls against racism, especially regarding police brutality against people of color and against peaceful protesters in the United States and some other countries. So it is this emphasis on culture in the news and the uprising in support of fairness and diversity that got me thinking about culture and how in the mental health of LGBT plus people in general and gay men in particular, which is my long-term area of specialization and expertise, that I wanted to write about how our cultural influences and practices can be part of sound mental health and cultivating the resilience that we need to face challenges and stressors in life. So while LGBT plus people all grow up in our family of origin in a specific group cultural context to country, city, neighborhood, and even family household together, those of us who are LGBT plus grow up to have a family of choice comprised of others who are LGBT plus. A young gay boy might grow up on the west side of Los Angeles to an upper middle class white Jewish family led by two heterosexual parents who are working professionals, maybe in the entertainment industry or law or medicine. But if that boy is gay, he also grows up to be part of the gay community, usually meeting peers and becoming part of a gay male social network, usually. So for gay men, we have the culture of our family of origin at first, but we evolve also into being part of the LGBT plus community worldwide. And in this way, we grow up and are formed in our personalities by two cultures, whereas our siblings who are straight might be part of their original culture and experience and define themselves by that culture for a lifetime, in essence replicating their parents' experience or even generations before them. That is an idea that I hear my clients discuss frequently in my clinical practice, whether with individuals or with couples. Most of the gay male couples that I see in my practice come from different original cultural backgrounds, such as ethnicities, races, or nationalities. And I don't think that bicultural gay male couples need therapy any more than others. I think it's just that practicing in Los Angeles tends to lend itself to diverse couplings because Los Angeles is such a culturally diverse city. But I also see gay male couples when I'm doing relationship coaching online in other cities as well, either in other states or even other parts of the world. And part of what I do in all couples work is what I call helping the partners navigating difference. How the two, or more in polyamory, partners in a couple or in a relationship can appreciate their differences, gaining a strength in diversity and harmony rather than letting their differences be a source of friction or conflict. If you go to gaytherapyla.com, I have a blog article on cross-cultural issues in gay male couples. And when I work with clients, they usually come to me seeking therapy, coaching, or sex therapy services to address a problem they are experiencing that's causing them stress or is undermining their subjective quality of life. And then we get into talking about ways of troubleshooting and resolving that challenge, solving the problem that they present to me, asking for help. But rather than being problem-focused entirely, social workers like me are taught to use what we call strengths-based resources, so that your strengths and aptitudes and talents and skills and even privileges of each client that I work with can be leveraged from one area of life that is working just fine and applied to the area where they are experiencing problems. So sometimes our strengths can be used to leverage to solve the weakest areas of our life. And it is from this strengths perspective that we can look at the role of culture. How can you take who you are and how you were raised in your country and family and time and place, and how can that help you with your current challenges or problems and enhance your quality of life? For some clients, they want to escape and really drive distance away from their culture of origin, such as being raised in sometimes particularly vicious and anti-gay religious backgrounds, which could be conservative evangelical churches that condemn LGBT people, and especially gay men, for being sick and bad and wrong and sinners and going to hell and all that stuff. And you might find that in a Catholic church or conservative or Orthodox Jewish or the Mormon church, certainly. Even in newer kind of controversial so-called religions like Scientology is notoriously anti-gay. And certainly in Muslim religious communities. Muslim governments around the world have actually killed their LGBT, but particularly their gay male citizens. And I've even heard of anti-gay aspects of very fringe cults that are neither evangelical nor Catholic nor anything else, but they're cults, but their cult leader somehow is anti-gay. I've never heard of a pro-gay fringe cult, for example. So for these guys, their culture of origin is a source of profound pain, even trauma, and they want to be as far away from that culture as possible when they grow up to be empowered adults, because they're really hurting, they're really traumatized from the damage that that culture and its anti-gay stress caused to their mental health. But even for guys who were raised in a culture that caused harm, whether it's a religious community like one of those or another culture, such as being a refugee from a country that was devastated by the effects of war or maybe famine, there is still a way to think of how culture can be used to our advantage for cultivating a personal resilience and a strength that serves our mental health. If we use that strengths-based perspective, we can think of how using cognitive therapy, one of my favorite psychotherapeutic techniques, we can do something called reframe our culture of origin into something that can be used to strengthen us. We can take a second look at it and we can say, can we think of this in a different way? Or rather than just recognizing the harmful parts, although that's important to validate our feelings, we can also say, was there anything about our culture of origin that we can use to help us, that we can kind of salvage? And so we're looking at how can you apply the strengths of your culture to your current personal or even professional challenges. So I want to take those items in the wheel of culture and take some examples and think about how you might think of these in terms of how you use them to build up your own strength in your sense of self and your self-confidence and what you're trying to accomplish, whether that's in your relationship or in your career or really applied to any life goal that you have that's important to you. So remember, number one was knowledge and stories. What do you know because of your own study of your own culture growing up? Were there texts, books, stories, or other sources of knowledge that taught you about life? What were the lessons that were taught in a religious institution or a school or family stories from your parents or your grandparents? For example, someone from an evangelical background might resent its teachings that basically amount to hating LGBT people as sinners. But there would have been a lot of imagery in that teaching about death and rebirth, or parables, or certain rituals around the holidays like Christmas or Easter. It might teach you about doing what's right, even though what they considered right might not be what you want to consider right as an empowered adult. But there may have been stories along the way that, taken even maybe a little bit out of context, like the importance of generosity, for example, the importance of compassion. Those are some of the knowledge and the stories you might have been exposed to that you still want to keep, even though you want no part of the damaging anti-gay material. So number two, let's look at language. How did you learn to talk? What language did you grow up speaking? What were the parables or the figures of speech or the idioms or the slang that helped you make sense of the world via language? There's a word for every object and for every concept and every action. So, do you notice a difference in how your grandparents or your parents talked versus how your peers in school talked? What's better about each of those, and what's worse? How do these influences help you determine how you want to speak now? Do you speak a different language now than what you were raised with? So how do you feel about that change? What have you learned about the world from speaking different languages? What about gay slang? How has this helped you understand your place in gay culture by knowing its language? Do you find some gay slang funny or appalling or maybe just useful in expressing yourself? What about the role of slang in the gay community that hurts others, like a gay community term that might have a racist overtone to it? Controversial phrases like calling somebody a rice queen, a gay guy who likes Asian guys, but, it kind of has that anti-Asian racist connotation to it. It's a slang and you might have heard it, but then it's not really a positive thing, whereas, let's take another phrase. I'm just thinking of one. RuPaul's Drag Race and his early songs, girl, you better work, So maybe a variation on work, W-R-O-R-K, and make it work, W-E-R-K, which means to maybe have confidence and to maybe be a little sassy and maybe be a little grand. That might be something that's a really positive word that inspires and, made RuPaul popular. Number 3 is traditions and rituals. What were the traditions in your house growing up? What did you always do around meals or at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day or around holidays? And what did you never do? What was forbidden in your house because it was a cultural thing not to do something? Who were you taught around the dinner table? Who were the good guys and who were the bad guys? Who were they socially? Who were they politically? What traditions or rituals, such as daily life or holidays of the year, do you carry over from childhood that are still important to you now? At Christmas time, do you put up a Christmas tree? Or do you put up a menorah if you're Jewish? What do you do around holidays that aren't really known in the United States? Or are there any holidays that you observe like many other people do, but you do it in a special way? Some families in America celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve rather than Christmas morning, and you have certain families that follow that tradition. And what traditions or rituals did you learn later away from your parents that you've embraced as a result of learning more about other people and other cultures? Are you partnered or married to someone who grew up in a different culture, and then in your house you now observe those traditions and rituals that you've adopted? Number 4 is techniques and skills. What do you know how to do as a result of your culture, like learning a folk skill or even a trade? What can you cook that is part of a skill that would have been very culturally specific? Like I work with Latino guys who know how to make good tamales because their abuela taught them, their grandmother. What is your culture of origin known for that other cultures might even envy about it? In the history of certain cultures in certain countries, around how trade was conducted, for example. Number 5, tools and objects. And what do you associate with your home growing up that was a tool or an object that's been imbued with some kind of meaning beyond what it's simply made of? Was there a mezuzah on the doorway or a crucifix on the wall? Are there any objects or heirlooms or decorations that you have that have a sentimental value to you that you wear or carry or display where you live now? Even the idea of wearing a wedding ring is certainly an object that's been imbued with meaning about love and relationships beyond just the metal that it's made of or some other material. How can you derive inspiration from the symbolic meaning that they have for you? Are there any objects that comfort you in times of stress? Think of how in so many cultures, holding the rosary beads and discharging some energy physically by rolling or touching the bead as they're saying a prayer, the rosary in a sense can be infused with this spiritual meaning, and then that can be seen as an object of comfort in times of stress. Number 6 is the arts. What do you know about the arts of music, or painting, or sculpture, or poetry, or theater, or prose that you associate with your culture? Are there songs or music that you associate with your culture? Which of the arts are you drawn to that were a positive influence of comfort or inspiration for you growing up? What artists do you associate with the time and the place you grew up in, and who inspired you? I was a little gay boy outside of Washington, D.C. in the 1960s and 70s and a little bit of the 80s. So I was influenced by people like Cher and Liza Minnelli or Judy Garland, the great, gay divas of that era, and maybe even a little before. Gay men can sometimes have kind of a retro appreciation sometimes. I grew up with TV shows like Bewitched and The Golden Girls, and movies like The Wizard of Oz and Tootsie. And I get a positive, relaxed feeling whenever I'm exposed to anything about any of those. So what kind of arts help you relax or bring back positive memories, like a reverie? Number 7 is food and drink. So what foods were you raised with that you still enjoy today? Are there any foods that were so much a part of your culture but they're unusual, and so you find yourself explaining to other people what you're eating or drinking and why you enjoy that? What is comfort food to you? What foods do you associate with the people who raised you? I have a ton of those. My mom's spaghetti sauce, or my grandmother's Chex Mix that she makes out of Chex cereal every Christmas time. That was a ritual and tradition for my family. What foods have a negative connotation that you avoid? I had conflict with my dad around certain food things, like a salt shaker or a ketchup bottle. There's a negative story behind each of those for me. What foods make you smile when you think about eating them? What do you eat or drink that might be unusual from other people you know, but you know those foods from your culture of origin? So, food and drink can be something that it goes beyond the nourishment of nutrition, and maybe some of it isn't even all that nutritious, but it's so imbued with an emotional connotation that we enjoy it anyway. Number 8 is values, and this is a really important one, maybe one of the most important in culture, is how do you define your values in terms of what's important to you? What priorities do you hold? What is your idea of justice? What is your idea of injustice that makes you righteously angry? What values do you have from your upbringing that you want to keep and preserve? And what values do you disagree with and you want to embody and teach and influence others to be the exact opposite? What values do you have that you really wish you didn't? What values do you hold that guide your way of life and help you survive when things are tough? Number 9 is the greater community. What did you like about your community growing up beyond your own household or family? What did your community do as a whole that made you feel like they were getting it right? Or what did your community do or not do that made you feel ashamed to be a part of it, or make you want to leave it in favor of something better? What did your community teach you that you carry with you to this day that strengthens or inspires you when times are tough? I think other topics to consider in culture beyond this list might be, what did your culture do for fun that maybe you still enjoy doing today, some kind of game, some kind of pastime? How did your culture approach topics in politics or spirituality? What were you taught in your culture about relationships or child rearing? What about sex? Was sex talked about at all? And if so, what did people say? What about money? What was the role of money in your culture? How was the approach to alcohol or substances? How did it deal with the environment and natural resources? What was its approach to education? What were you taught about business and work life? What were you taught about the role of animals, or children, or the elderly, or the disabled? What were you taught about beauty and grooming standards? What about fashion? What do you wear? What was social justice? What was the role of exercise? How was criminal justice handled? How were LGBT issues handled? What were you taught about race? The difference between different races? What were you taught about gender roles? What was the role of technology? What were you taught about history of the world or of your immediate community? How was health and medicine approached? What was the situation with the law? What was legal, and how were legal things carried out? All of these elements of culture in part made you who you are today in your culture of origin, but also all of these items in a specifically LGBT plus context also made you what you are today. Because you've had to interpret how to be a gay man in the context of all these other elements of the wheel of culture. And that's how you get your bearings. That's how you get your sense of your place in the world, is by reconciling those things. So by applying some nice, healthy, critical thinking to these items in culture, we can take a self-empowered approach to double down and really commit to the cultural traits that we love and appreciate in ourselves and others. And we also learn what not to do when we experience cultural items that we associate with mean-spiritedness or selfishness or violence, either legally, like denying civil rights, or socially, or even corporally of the body, or even exploitation. We underscore the traits when we're adults that we want to celebrate, and we work hard to eliminate the traits and influences that bring us down. We can grow beyond what we grew up with, and we get to make, isn't it nice? We get to make the empowered choice to keep what feels right for us, but we also get to make the empowered choice to get rid of what didn't work for us. So part of why world cultures develop is to help human beings throughout history to adapt to their environment, where it is in world geography, with the climate, with the natural resources that were available, with interactions with others, and also its place in history, so that the various peoples endure and even thrive generation after generation, sometimes for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, or millions if you look at the entire history of humankind. So your quality of life can be influenced by how you navigate and apply the cultural traits you want to emphasize as a way of your life. And when you celebrate the best parts of the culture you came from with the best parts of the culture or cultures that you have adopted as an empowered adult, you're helping yourself improve your own quality of life. So when LGBT plus people in general, and gay men in particular, we're faced with so many stressors in the modern world, we need to identify and apply all of the sources of inspiration and strength that we can find. And all of these cultural elements can really play into the picture, and they really help our emotional adaptive coping toolbox to help us endure. So for help and support that's individualized to you and your particular person in environment, cultural context, and to face challenges that worry you, please consider therapy or coaching services. We're here to help. There's myself and my 2 associate clinicians, therapists and coaches at Gay Therapy LA. More articles are available at gaytherapyla.com, and information about my services. You can always call or text me in the United States at 310-339-5778. That's 310-339-5778. Email is just ken@gaytherapyla.com for more information on all the services that we offer. So, thanks, and I'll see you next time.